Hey, good evening, everyone. Welcome to the Unitarian Universalist Society of Geneva. We have what we hope will be an informative evening for you tonight. Rebecca Glenberg, Chief Litigating Legal Counsel, First Amendment at the ACLU of Illinois, is joining us. And perhaps we can all leave tonight with a little bit better understanding of the Illinois Trust Act, immigration in general, and how it's affecting our communities, both the citizens and the immigrants alike. So I just want to spend a couple minutes telling you how we got here tonight. Back in August of this year, the Social and Racial Justice Committees of this church, the Congregational Church of Batavia, and St. Charles Episcopal Church decided to craft a letter urging our municipalities and police departments not to cooperate with ICE. We asked them to refrain from sharing detention centers and/or information and databases with ICE, and to continue to follow all state and local laws in their dealings with the federal government. Our hope was to get churches to co-sign the letter and then digitally and by hand deliver the letter to our police chiefs and mayors and leaders of the municipalities, the board presidents of the Kane County, the state's attorney, and the county sheriff. We had moderate success gathering signatures. We ultimately got 7 churches and 5 pastors to sign off on the letter. But at the other end, not so much. We got one response. Geneva Mayor Kevin Burns, our old friend Kevin, responded. He also emailed me tonight expressing regrets that he couldn't join us. So nobody else responded to the letter. We were able to track a few of them down through friendships and phone calls and showing up at events, and they all told us pretty much the same thing. Not much we can do. We're honoring the Trust Act. So at every gathering that the 3 of us that got this going attended, we would say, who knows anything about the Trust Act? And nobody would raise their hand. Nobody knows. So we decided then to see if we could get a couple of those officials to come and maybe educate us a little bit about what's going on with immigration in our community, what they're doing, what the Trust Act is. And again, we got nothing from them. So through our good friend Daryl Woods, we asked the ACLU if they would come and tell us a little bit about immigration in our area, and they said yes. So we thank you for that. They said they'd be glad to come and help us understand. That's all we want to do is understand. So, which brings us to tonight's presentation. Rebecca Glenberg is the Chief First Amendment litigator at the ACLU of Illinois and was previously the legal director at the ACLU of Virginia. For over 25 years, she has worked to promote and defend free speech, religious liberty, voting rights, privacy rights, immigrants' rights, LGBTQ+ rights, and other civil rights and civil liberties. Rebecca received her JD in 1997 from the University of Chicago Law School, where she represented clients in the school's Homeless Assistance Project. Please give Rebecca a big hand.
Hi, thanks for that great welcome, and thanks to everyone for being here. I'm really glad to be here talking to you today. The presentation today is mostly about immigrants' rights, but it's also about the rights of bystanders who witness immigration enforcement action. Let's see. I wonder which of these buttons. There's the button. A disclaimer, standard disclaimer. This presentation contains general information about the law. It does not constitute legal advice.
It's off. There we go.
And anyone should consult a lawyer for advice on specific circumstances. Okay, that wasn't the button. Did I turn it off? There, okay. So here's an overview of where we're going on basic federal and state legal rights of immigrants, encountering ICE on the streets, the Fourth Amendment and warrants, ICE appearing at the home, ICE in the workplace, ICE arrests, and the Illinois Trust Act. And then we'll talk a little bit about bystander rights. This is something that many of us have added to our presentations in the last 9 months or so. Even if you know and exercise your constitutional rights, police officers or ICE might not honor them. It's never good to use force or physically resist police officers or ICE, even when you know they are wrong. Challenging misconduct cannot be done in the moment. It can only be done through legal and advocacy efforts afterwards. If you think police or ICE have violated your rights, write everything down as soon as possible, including any identifying information about the officers and their vehicles. If the police or ICE stop you in violation of your rights, tell your lawyer. If injured, seek medical attention and take photos. Okay, basic state and federal rights. Okay, so if you are an immigrant or if you are not an immigrant and you encounter ICE, and I should say this presentation was authored a few months ago. Right now in Chicago, we have ICE, that's Immigration and Customs Enforcement, and also CBP, which is Customs and Border Patrol, both enforcing immigration law in Chicago, and both creating damage as they do so. So when I say ICE, you should think of both agencies. They're both engaged in similar actions in Chicago. But when you encounter them on the street, you have the right to remain silent. If you have no valid immigration documents, you have the right to remain silent about your immigration status and whether you have documents. If you do have valid immigration documents, you should show them when asked. The law requires immigrants who have been issued valid immigration documents to carry those documents at all times, even though this law is rarely enforced. But it's important never to show false or forged documents. That is a sure way to get into trouble. An immigrant who does not have immigration documents but has been present in the U.S. for more than 2 consecutive years might want to carry some documents that show that they've been here for 2 consecutive years, like mortgages and leases and some of these other documents. The reason for that is that the Trump administration has claimed the authority to deport any undocumented immigrant without a hearing if they've been in the country for less than 2 consecutive years. Obviously, we disagree with that interpretation of the law, but this is the claim. The Fourth Amendment is what governs a lot of these interactions with ICE. The Fourth Amendment says the right of the people to be secure in their persons, houses, papers, and effects against unreasonable searches and seizures shall not be violated, and no warrants shall issue but upon probable cause supported by oath or affirmation, and particularly describing the place to be searched and the persons or things to be seized. So what that means is the Fourth Amendment limits when law enforcement can enter or search private property, seize property, or make an arrest. And the Fourth Amendment is strongest in places where there's a reasonable expectation of privacy, and it's at its weakest in public places. So, as we'll talk about a little bit coming up, law enforcement sometimes needs a warrant to execute a search or seizure. And in the immigration context, there's 2 types of warrants that are important. One of them is the judicial warrant, which provides the name of a court, like the U.S. District Court for the Northern District of Illinois, and is signed by a judge. There are also what are called non-judicial warrants or administrative warrants, or possibly a warrant of removal or deportation or a warrant for arrest that are not signed by a judge. This is a form that's issued by a federal agency, Department of Homeland Security, and is signed by a federal official rather than a judge. So this is a sample of an administrative warrant. And I know it's hard to read, but at the top it says, U.S. Department of Homeland Security warrant for arrest of alien. And the signature blank at the bottom is for the signature of an authorized immigration officer, not a judge. So that's how you know this is not a judicial warrant. There's no signature by a judge and there's no court listed at the top. This is a sample federal judicial warrant. You can see it is, or maybe you can't, again, it's sort of hard to read. At the top it says United States District Court for the Northern District of Illinois. And at the bottom, where it's highlighted, is the place for the judge to sign. And it says judge's signature. So this is how you know you have a federal judicial warrant. Court at the top, judge's signature at the bottom. I see a question.
Does the administrative warrant, when it says as authorized administrative person, does that mean they have a badge number or some kind of indication that they're actually some real administrative official? How do you know that signature is somebody that's for real and not just?
The question is, how do you know that the signature on an administrative warrant is real? And the answer is, you don't. I mean, the same way you know that the signature at the bottom of a judicial warrant is real, you don't really. But yeah, obviously someone can get into very serious trouble for serving a forged warrant. But yeah, you pretty much have to trust the signature. Yes.
I took some know your rights training, and they said it had to be a judicial warrant, and administrative warrant wasn't legit. So you're saying it could be.
Yeah, there are different purposes for these two warrants, and we'll get into that in just a moment. In general, to enter private places, you need a judicial warrant. But immigration arrests can be effected with an administrative warrant. And now I'm going to say that same thing in a bunch more words. So when ICE knocks on the door, ICE cannot enter a home without either a judicial warrant or a person's consent. And a consent is in green letters there because it's like a big green light. Once you've given your consent, that's the end of it. You don't get to object anymore, and you don't get to object in court. So it's very important not to give consent when there's no warrant. If there's a warrant, they get to enter regardless of your consent. A judicial warrant, again, court's name at the top, judge's signature at the bottom. So don't let ICE into the home, open the door, or step outside until you've seen a warrant signed by a judge. You can ask the ICE agent to hold the warrant up to the window or slide it under the door, and check if the warrant is signed by a judge. If not, you can say, I don't want to talk to you, or I don't have to let you in. Very similar rules in the workplace. But ICE may enter parts of the workplace that are open to the general public without a warrant. So, for example, if you work in a store, most parts of a store are open to the general public, and ICE gets to go wherever the general public gets to go without a warrant. But ICE may not enter private areas of the workplace, so think like the back stock room or other places where only employees are allowed, or even more secure places where only management is allowed. They may not enter those areas unless they have a judicial warrant, again, court at the top, judge's signature at the bottom, or someone consents. So, again, consent, no. So you can have a more supportive workplace by having a policy designating the private areas of the workplaces and clearly marking or locking private areas. Do not consent to ICE entering private areas without a judicial warrant. Teach employees to exercise their right to remain silent. Make a plan for ICE raids and practice it like a fire drill. And that plan should include, for example, who you're going to call, who has authority to give consent, and who is going to examine the documents and determine what is actually allowed by them. If the workplace has a lawyer, of course, the answer to all these questions is call the lawyer. But otherwise, someone in a position of responsibility should be designated to handle these things. And finally, if something does happen, document what happened, write down who was involved, what agency, and what they did, and where they went, and what kind of documents they carried with them. Yes?
So I've been handing out Know Your Rights cards to restaurants, and so I've been saying maybe go to a locked liquor room with people if they're concerned, but they can't go back to they're not supposed to go back to the kitchen?
ICE?
Yeah.
ICE should not be allowed where members of the public are not allowed. So, yeah.
I was just wondering, do those window decals suffice as a way to prohibit ICE from even entering? Does that constitute non-consent if there's a decal on the business window saying ICE is prohibited?
So first of all, it doesn't help with any public areas. So if there's a public waiting room, for example, for a doctor or other business, or again, like a store, the decal doesn't really do anything, except tell ICE you're not welcome. So if it's a business that's not open to the public, they should knock on the door. If it's possible to keep the area locked, that's a good way to keep them out. And then they need to ask for your permission to come in, and you say no, not without a warrant. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I just think a lot of businesses feel that there is a sense of security with those decals, and maybe that's misleading for the business owners.
Well, I think it depends on the decal, and it depends on, because I've also seen signs that are more explanatory that say, ICE is not allowed in the private areas of this business, for example. Yeah, the real key is whether it's open to the public. Oh my. Okay.
I was just gonna ask, with a judicial warrant, does it have to list the person's name that they want to detain and their address? Or it sounds, the way you were talking about it sounds almost more general. I understood it had to have a name and address and signed by the judge.
So if it's an arrest warrant, it does have to have a name. I don't think it needs to have their address. Typically in the immigration context, we're not dealing with judicial arrest warrants. But if the point is just to enter into a place or to search a place, it has to have the address of the place or else some other real detailed description of it and the places and things particularly to be searched. Yeah.
Can I just ask, maybe we can hold our questions till after Rebecca's done presenting, otherwise we'll be here till midnight. Thank you.
Happy to accommodate whichever way people like to do it. Okay, so an arrest can take place using either a judicial warrant for arrest or one of those non-judicial warrants that we saw earlier. You don't need a warrant signed by a judge to effectuate an immigration arrest. And, oh, what happened? Where'd Jeff go? There we go. Okay. Because I don't know what to say when the slides aren't up there. Okay. Now, you also can, the ICE can also arrest an immigrant without a warrant if they have both reason to believe that the person is in the United States in violation of the law and that the person is likely to escape before a warrant can be obtained for his arrest. So both of those things have to be true, or they're supposed to be true. Okay. The ACLU of Illinois and the National Immigrant Justice Center brought a lawsuit on just this thing during the first Trump administration in 2018 when there were a number of raids in the Chicago area. The challenge was to collateral arrests, which means they typically have a warrant for someone and they go to the place where that person is and lawfully arrest them pursuant to the warrant and then just sweep up everyone who's around in a workplace or a home. And as we just saw, you really can only do that without a warrant when there's probable cause to believe that the person is in the country unlawfully or likely to flee. Oh, look at this. You know, I just realized that the slide is projected right up there too. It's too small for me to read though. So I'm going to keep turning around. We filed this lawsuit and reached a settlement which has just recently been extended to February 2nd. And so in order to ensure that ICE is only arresting people who are likely to flee or who they have some reason to believe is likely to flee, they're required to take into account specific information about a person's community ties, so family, home, employment, church, whatever, before arresting a person without a warrant, and must document the specific facts supporting the legal basis for the arrest, including the reasons why they believe that the person is likely to flee. So this settlement appeared to be followed pretty much in the Biden administration, and then not so much the last 9 months. And so we've been working on enforcing the settlement and bringing violations to the court's attention. There are so many of them that we're not really keeping up with them. That's one reason why the judge extended the consent decree. But if you know of one of these arrests without a warrant and without probable cause to believe that someone was in the country unlawfully and that they're likely to flee, and they reside in Illinois, Indiana, Wisconsin, Kentucky, Kansas, or Missouri, or I'm sorry, if they're arrested in any of those states. There is a place to report it, which is www.immigrantjustice.org. And from there, you can search for the Castagna-Nava referral form. Unfortunately, there's not a URL that's really easy to remember. But this is how you would report a violation of that. Okay, so the Illinois Trust Act is a little good news here because our state has decided that it wants to do what it can to promote trust between immigrant communities and law enforcement by ensuring that state and local law enforcement are not engaged in immigration enforcement. Because as you can imagine, if you or someone in your family is at risk of immigration enforcement and you think that your state or local police is working with ICE and may apprehend you or your family member or your friend or even the person that you're reporting, you may not want to do that. So the Illinois Trust Act prohibits state and local police from enforcing federal immigration law. And so, among other things, that includes asking if someone is a citizen or asking them about their immigration status, to stop, arrest, search, or keep somebody only because of their immigration status, to provide housing in a jail or a facility on ICE's behalf, or to assist ICE with enforcement operations, unless there is a federal criminal warrant. So if there's some criminal offense and it's not just an immigration enforcement action, then state and local police are allowed to cooperate and participate. The Trust Act gives the state attorney general the authority to enforce it. So, unfortunately, someone like me, a civil rights lawyer, is not much help. It's the attorney general has the exclusive authority to enforce the statute. And it's their civil rights division. And I've got their phone number and their email address right there for when state and local police are violating the Trust Act. Okay. What if you are walking down the street and encounter one of these ICE interactions? First of all, you have the right to remain silent. You may find yourself in an encounter with an ICE official or a federal official, and you do not have to say anything to them. The First Amendment protects your right to protest. It also protects your right to document what is happening. You just don't want to get yourself in a position where you can be accused of interfering with the officer's operation. So you don't want to get in their face, you don't want to get between them and someone that they are interacting with, and so forth. You want to stand at some distance, and you can take photographs or video or write down what is happening. And the First Amendment protects all of those rights. Those rights are also protected by a federal court order that was just obtained last week, the week before, pretty recently, by a group of lawyers, including ACLU lawyers, who brought a lawsuit complaining that ICE was tear gassing and using rubber bullets and using pepper balls and so forth against peaceful protesters. And that includes protesters who were protesting at the detention center in Broadview, which is on the way out here from Chicago. And Also, people protesting and documenting ICE's activities when they're out in the neighborhoods. So this federal court order prohibits those uses of force against protesters, also journalists, also clergy who are engaged in religious activities, such as attempting to pray over ICE officials, who don't seem to like that very much. But those are your First Amendment rights. Looks like we're at the end. And so here are a number of resources that can also be helpful. The ACLU has good Know Your Rights videos on its website. And also Know Your Rights materials. There are some links in some of the materials that I put out on the piano. The Illinois Coalition for Immigrant and Refugee Rights is a really important organization. They're a statewide coalition of immigrants' rights organizations, and they have a hotline which was meant to be easy to read by being read, but instead is faint and hard to read. 1-855-435-7693, 1-855-435-7693. Is a hotline, and it's a place, it's a hotline that can be called by immigrants who have a family member detained or who are in need of legal counsel or other supports. It also is a number that bystanders can call if they've documented something happening and they want someone to have that information who may be able to put it to good use in assisting someone who was detained. That is the number to call. The American Immigration Lawyers Association has referrals to immigration lawyers. The National Immigration Law Center, or NILC, has all sorts of really great know your rights guides for very specific situations. And the National Immigrant Justice Center provides pro bono legal assistance in some kinds of immigration cases. And we saw their URL before, www.immigrantjustice.org. And there's my email address, if you have any questions. But that's it, that's the presentation. And so now I am happy to answer any questions. And I see them popping up, but that was the first one. So, I can go back to some of these slides. Also, I sent an email of this presentation to the organizers of this program, and I don't know, they may be able to email some of this information. They're like, great, another task. Yeah. Okay.
Thank you. It'll be there. Oh. I decided to go get a microphone, that way we can all do it better.
And then that way everybody can hear the questions a little. There we go. Who was talking? I'm sorry. Could we turn the lights on? Oh, yeah.
If you reach out to any of the people who invited you here tonight, either Daryl, myself, Ian Alexander, or Lance and Sherry, we'll be forward it. Act as a conduit to reach any numbers.
Okay, he's going to turn on the lights. So.
I should say also that there's a brochure on the piano called Know Your Rights Under the TRO or something like that. That gives a URL to report violations of the restraining order I mentioned that prohibits the use of violence against protesters and journalists and people who are documenting what ICE is doing. Yes. Oh, I'm sorry. I should not be calling on people.
I'll bring the microphone over to you in a moment.
Okay.
Hey, first, thank you very much for coming out here tonight from Chicago. What about public schools? I mean, they are for the public, but is ICE prohibited from going past the entrance?
So again, it depends on what the school's policy is with respect to the general public. So I know that Chicago Public Schools doesn't allow just anyone to enter the school. And they have a protocol for when ICE wants to enter the school. I think the protocol involves calling their lawyer who will instruct them on whether or not there's grounds for them to enter the school. They would need, because the school is not open to the general public, they would need a judicial warrant to enter the school. When I was in school, you could just walk into a school. I don't know if there are any schools like that anymore where anyone can just walk in. But if that were the case, then ICE could just walk in. But otherwise, they're subject to the same rules as everyone else, and they need a warrant if they want to come in a way that is different from the general public is allowed.
Yeah, you mentioned that there was documentation of violations of the TRO. Does that intersect with what I think Governor Pritzker just initiated a commission to look into ICE and violence and use of force?
I just heard about that today also. So my understanding is they're looking at that sort of thing, as well as, violation of immigrants' rights, and whatever other shady behavior may come to their attention. But I don't know any details about Governor Pritzker's task force.
Thank you again for being here. I have a question. If I, as a homeowner, were watching someone on the street and ICE approaches them and they were to come into my house, are they then safe inside my house for as long as they're there? Or is that like a pursuit thing?
Yeah, I think that it's a really complicated question, because if you deliberately prevented them from pursuing the person, you might be guilty of harboring, it's not called harboring a fugitive, right, but something like that. So it's a complicated question, and one that I wouldn't want to give legal advice on from the podium.
Thank you.
Hello, I would repeat, thank you for being here. When you talk consent in someone's home, and say there's a family and there's a 14-year-old who thinks it's their friend coming over, and they say, oh yeah, I'll get my mom and dad, come on in. Is there an age requirement or a designated person that can say, yes, that determines consent?
Yeah, it has to be someone who ICE can reasonably believe has authority to allow them to enter the place. Now, I don't know about a 14-year-old. I would have to do the legal research. I think it's good for kids who may be answering the door to know not to let people in unless they know them, would be my advice.
Anybody else? Okay, actually, just pass it over to her then. There we go, Suzanne.
Thank you again for coming. So some people are getting trained, the rapid responder type people, in walking kids to school. Is that a violation?
No. I mean, if for some reason ICE wanted to arrest that kid and you did this, that could be a problem. I haven't heard of ICE arresting actual kids on their way to school. But yeah, yet. But just walking the kid to school and making sure that they're safe, that's not a violation of any law.
I'm concerned about this flight risk. It seems like a very slippery slope that an ICE agent can say, oh, this person, no matter whether he's a church member or has a good job here, he can slip away.
Yeah, it is unfortunately not the kind of tight standard that one would want. We're doing our best to enforce it by requiring that they write down the actual reasons why they believe that, and requiring them to consider certain factors, and then being able to bring those cases to the judge where it doesn't seem to make sense. But you're right, but that's what the standard is.
And a quick follow-up, it just seems like the number of people that are being rounded up, it seems like there should be a legal recourse, and it's got to be an incredible backlog of how to handle each case.
Yeah, we're trying to, we've tried to convince the judge to allow for some more efficient ways to deal with these cases, but as it is, the consent decree that we have has this one-by-one process where we have to bring each one to the prosecutor before we can bring it to the court, and then the court, the prosecutor may agree to order relief or may not, and then we can go to court, the consent decree was crafted at a time when we didn't know there were going to be hundreds of potential cases at a time.
Rebecca, it's my understanding that seeking asylum in the United States is legal. That once someone reaches United States soil, they have the right to turn themselves over to immigration officials and seek asylum. Is that a correct understanding?
Yes, if they have a credible fear of prosecution if they're returned to their country.
Exactly. And then they have the right to a hearing, do they not? To see if their claim is credible.
That's right.
Okay, then how did all of these people who came to the United States to seek asylum, how did they all of a sudden become illegal immigrants?
Well, they're not illegal immigrants. It's possible that they are eligible to be detained, however. So you typically, an asylum applicant would be released on bond while their proceedings are taking place. But yes, there are all of these arrests taking place. I'm not an immigration lawyer, so I don't really want to comment on the legality of that, but you can sort of guess where I might, where my sympathies are. But yeah, we do immigrants' rights cases, but that does not include the actual litigation of various claims like asylum or other claims for relief from removal. So I'm just not an expert.
Thank you for staying later for the additional questions. I'm curious if the ACLU has a similar technology and capabilities to fact-check ICE in terms of the determinations that they're making for these residents. I won't really call them immigrants, but do you have access to the same systems that ICE is making these determinations on people's statuses?
No.
Okay.
Hi. Okay, so from what you're saying, this church, for instance, is open to the public, right?
Is it? I mean, that's a matter
Isn't
of the
it?
policy of the church.
So ICE could come into this church on a Sunday morning and try to arrest someone or take someone or whatever, right?
That's correct.
That's a horrifying thought.
Yes, it is. And of course, it used to be the case that there were policies in place that protected schools, hospitals, and places of worship from being entered by ICE, except in the case of like an emergency. And all of those policies have just been withdrawn under the current administration. Where's the mic? Whoever has
That's
the
okay,
mic gets
Ed,
to
you can
speak.
ask your question.
Is it then real important that churches and places of worship designate private areas where people can go and not be detained?
So it's important to designate private areas so that you know where a warrant is required in order to go. But if ICE comes to the door and you say, okay, quick, anyone with a problem, go to the private areas, you may be, again, involved in harboring.
Okay. I have a broader question about the kind of interaction between state and federal law in this whole thing. I guess a couple parts of the question. How unique is Illinois in having this kind of legislation like the Trust Act? I mean, are we one of a few states? Are we one of many states? If you happen to know.
Yeah, we're one of a few states, and I don't know off the top of my head exactly how many or what they are, other than California. Okay. But of course, there are also many more individual cities and counties that have their own, sanctuary laws, so that they prohibit their local police, at least, from working with ICE. And there are hundreds of those, I believe.
Okay. And has there been to this point, or is the ACLU kind of thinking about or preparing for, has there been any actual kind of pushback, retaliation, challenge from the federal government to the fact that we have this law?
Yes.
That is, I mean, what's going on with that, basically?
There was the federal government filed a lawsuit against the state of Illinois, the city of Chicago, and Cook County for having these kinds of policies prohibiting cooperation with ICE. They lost. The state, the city, and the county all filed motions to dismiss the case, and the judge granted them. Just today or yesterday, the federal government appealed. So we'll see.
So that's kind of ongoing and still massive.
Yes. The case law is pretty clear that states get to decide how to deploy their own law enforcement resources. And there are no federal laws that actually require state and local police to cooperate with ICE. There are plenty of laws that facilitate such cooperation, but none that require it. So, we're pretty hopeful that courts will continue to find that it's perfectly fine for states to have these laws and that they're perfectly effective. But obviously, they need to wind their way through the courts.
So I'd like to touch back on what Melissa mentioned regarding the church. And I can't imagine any church, maybe in the world, but at least in the US, that would say, no, if you're not a member of this church, you're not allowed in here. So does that mean there's no church that can be protected from ICE entering?
I mean, I can tell you that for security reasons, I'm aware that, like, for example, there are synagogues that lock their doors and that are very careful about who is allowed in. And yeah, it's possible to have a policy like that. But yes, I know it's a really tough conundrum for a lot of places of worship that you want to be open to everyone. But that is the implication of it, that if it's open to the public, it's open to ICE.
So even before they lock their doors, when the congregation members are coming in, that means ICE can come in before they lock the doors, if I'm understanding correctly.
Well, again, you can know who the members of your congregation are and let only them in. That's not open to the public. But, in general, yes, if your policy is, please come in.
Mm-hmm. Wow.
I should say we haven't seen that. We haven't seen ICE really invading churches and places of worship, but they have claimed the authority to do so.
So, and even if ICE can come into, a public place, do they have sort of unfettered right to, for example, come in and disrupt a worship service or, do whatever they want on private property? I mean, do you have any, I don't know if you know the answer.
That's a good question, and I don't know the answer off the top of my head.
Okay, thank you.
Okay. This is in regards to the Broadview Detention Center. What's the status? Why is it that the Illinois State Police has been able to arrest protesters?
Well, it's a very fine line there because the state and local police are not supposed to be working with ICE and assisting ICE. At the same time, they can enforce state and local law, and if people are violating the law, they can arrest them. It's a very tricky area, and it's one that the Attorney General ultimately gets to make the determination of whether he's going to enforce the Trust Act under those circumstances.
Can I ask one more question? It's on the same line. So when Illinois State Police or ICE or whoever are these masked goons, when there are protesters and they move the line where there's a protesting zone, is it to be assumed if you stand there and not move back, you'll be arrested? Even though you're standing in a place where you have the right to protest?
I think I would be, if you don't want to be arrested, it's my advice that you follow the instruction of law enforcement. Now, whether it's constitutional for them to do that is another question, and one that would have to be looked at separately, but my advice would be to follow instructions. As we sort of said at the beginning, you can challenge it afterwards. Document it.
I have another question. Does the Trust Act prevent Illinois law enforcement from entering into the 287 agreements with ICE where they deputize the local law enforcement and give them the federal power of immigration enforcement? Because there are sheriff's departments across the state where sheriffs have come out and said, I'm not really keen on the Trust Act. So what legal limit is there from the state to make sure we don't have a constitutional sheriff step into some nonsense?
The Trust Act does prohibit sheriffs and local police from entering into those so-called 287G agreements. Again, the enforcement of that depends on the Attorney General.
I don't have a question, but in response to your question about asylum seekers, they've actually changed some of the targets. So Venezuela, for example, had special status for asylum seekers, and this administration removed that special status. Cuba also has special status. I do not know if they've removed that. And because of the asylum seekers, I was just in Juarez in June, and before, when you'd cross the bridge, you could go into or get halfway across, and so then you could declare or ask for asylum as soon as you were halfway across. Now there's Custom and Border Patrol on the Mexican side, and so they ask to see your papers before you get midway across the bridge. And if you do not have papers, they do not even let you to set foot on the American soil to claim asylum anymore. So the numbers have just plummeted. And then it takes 5 to 8 years for many of the people that are applied for asylum, so they're in the country for that many years without any ability, any rights really at that point. So it's just such a long process for those people that, 5 to 8 years. But I just wanted to share that, so.
Yeah, I do think the special status for people of particular countries is something separate from asylum. But I couldn't comment on the policies at the border right now.
I can go ahead and answer your question regarding Cubans. I'm a Cuban immigrant, so I know what used to be the rule was if a Cuban touched soil, came along the beach, you touched soil, your asylum is in process and is granted. They canceled that. They reversed it, and now they are taking Cubans.
Is that recent?
Yes, that's very recent. Yeah, and
like this administration.
This administration, yes, and so that they are also now subject to the same. You cross the border or a fence or whatever, then you're subject to everything else. Okay, and then she was next. And then you can just give it to her.
Okay. I have a question about suburban bystanders. Is that what you were calling it? Yeah.
For lack of a better word.
Yeah, no, that was good. Because a lot of action is going on around here too. And when we're called, usually ICE is already gone. But if that does happen, we can take pictures, document, as long as we don't get in the way, right?
Right.
But they're pretty aggressive.
Yeah, so this is what the law says. You can do that. And this is what the temporary restraining order says. You can do that, and they're not to use violence against you. They have violated the restraining order sometimes. Yeah.
All right, last one from me, I promise you. So about a month ago, we went and met with State's Attorney Jamie Mosser, and she called out the fact that this Trust Act specifically applies to officers, not administrations, not administrators, not, secretaries, agencies. So she was calling out the fact that it's specific to collaboration with officers. So can I get clarification of whether there's a gap or if there's some sort of a loophole in there or that we need to be concerned about, or does it kind of mean anyone from that municipality?
I'm trying to see if I can Google the language really quickly because it's law enforcement, but I thought that included state's attorneys, but don't quote me on that until I see the language. You don't have to sit here and watch me Google.
Thank you. I appreciate you checking on it. I just think there was a lot of confusion, and I know a lot of these cities are trying to interpret the Trust Act themselves. So I think if we start with a basic understanding, then that's a way we can kind of build on that so we can start protecting the communities and that we're not leaving out any possibilities for additional concerns.
Law enforcement agency means an agency of the state or unit of local government charged with enforcement of state, county, or municipal laws, or managing custody of detained persons in the state. I would include the state's attorney. Law enforcement official means any individual with the power to arrest or detain individuals, including law enforcement officers, corrections officers, and others employed or designated by a law enforcement agency. it's a little ambiguous as to state's attorneys, to be honest. But this is the category as law enforcement officers.
Any other questions at this point?
A few of us have an appointment with some of the judges to ask them, because they've already talked to a group of people about how they really can't do anything. If there is an ICE agent outside and there's somebody that they want to have inside the courthouse, you know, we ask, could they stay overnight? You know, that kind of thing. No, they can't. So they'd go outside and get arrested, and they can't do much about that. Is there a way that if a person doesn't have internet that needs to go to court, if somebody let them use their internet to have a court case, would that be aiding and abetting, or would that be helping somebody that needs help?
Yeah, so you're talking about in a court that allows for
a Zoom
participation by Zoom. Yeah, I don't see any reason why you can't let someone use your internet for that purpose. It's just if, you know, you are deliberately hiding someone from ICE, you're doing someone a favor. I mean, you're going grocery shopping for someone who's afraid to leave the house. You're lending someone your internet. Those are not things that should get you into trouble for harboring. It's when you are deliberately putting yourself between or hiding someone's location from ICE that you get into trouble for those sorts of things.
Are federal courts using Zoom?
Federal courts, some federal courts will use Zoom, and it really just depends on the judge. And yeah, it's the same with state courts. It depends on the court. It depends on the judge.
Okay, I think we'll close it with the amount of time, and I don't see any other questions. So Ed, I'll let you.
Well, Rebecca, thank you so much for coming out. I know what the commute is like. This is confusing stuff, and there's a lot of it. So hopefully we're all going to leave here tonight with a little bit better understanding what the Trust Act means, what immigration means, what we can do, what we cannot do. So it was really nice having you here. Thank you again. All the way from the city of Chicago. All the way from the city of Chicago. I know what that's like. Just two things before we go. I want to thank a few people, some real important people before we close tonight. Sherry Wilson and Laz Escalano, thank you for hosting us tonight. Good round of applause. Also, Ann Alexander, where are you? And you inspire us every day. Really, you do. And Daryl Woods, thank you for acting as our liaison with Rebecca. Thanks for coming out tonight. I did promise my friend Sue that I would let her put a shameless plug in for one of our, you know what, one more thing before Sue grabs the mic. Get involved, do something, join something. Create alliances with your friends and your family. Reach out to people. Do those one-to-one relational meetings that we learned about in organizing.
Thank you so much for giving me an opportunity. I'll try and be quick. This is not immigration, but it has to do with affordable housing, which is next step off. There is going to be a meeting for the 1212 Larkin affordable housing up in Elgin. On November 8th at 11 o'clock, it's going to start at Christ the Lord Church. And we're trying to get the local mayors to come. So Mayor Burns has been asked, Mayor Hull in St. Charles has been asked, Mayor Schilke in Batavia has been asked to come. I've already got commitments from several of the alder people in those various communities to come see what affordable housing can look like in the area. And we need a good turnout from the general population to show that, yes, we want affordable housing. I've got more information. Come see me after this is over. Thank you. Thank you.
That's it, man. Go home.